Welcome to the Missing Links podcast. I'm your host, Geeky Kitten.
And I'm your co-host, Analyticat.
We're going to be discussing the issues with women in the gaming space and the importance of male allyship in overcoming these societal obstacles. Today, I'd like to talk about the statistics surrounding women growing as a gamer group and the hesitation that women have experienced in identifying themselves as such. So, to get us started, let's look at the statistics of women since the pandemic, since that started shifting things a little bit.
Right. So there has been an exponential increase in female gamership, partially attributable to pandemic lockdowns. In 2020, 41% of US gamers were women, according to Statista. In 2021, 45%. In 2022, 48%. In 2023, a slight downturn, 46% of US women identified as gamers. Online gaming among female players is growing at a rate of approximately 33% annually, and women are predicted to dominate the gaming landscape within the next year.
All right. So, if we break that down in terms of the console wars versus PC gamers, I'm wondering what that looks like. Because we know that there is a little bit of a difference, or at least has been historically, in the types of mediums that women use versus men use.
So, according to Kotaku, in the US, 52% of Switch owners, 45% of Xbox owners, and 41% of PS5 owners are female. And according to Circana's Player Pulse, 47% of console players, 50% of PC video game players, and 54% of mobile video game players are female.
Okay. All right. So that does, for the most part, sound like what we've generally seen, which is a preference, if you will, to the Nintendo Switch and to mobile games. And I think the reason that we're still seeing this, although it definitely seems like it's evening out, I mean, those percentages are not all that far from each other. But I think the reason that we continue to see the preferential treatment of the Switch and mobile gaming is because of the library of games available on those systems. So when you think of the Nintendo Switch, they have a lot in terms of the cozy game genre. So games like Stardew Valley and Rune Factory and Story of Seasons, and these kind of slower paced, more relaxing games. They usually have, kind of cutesy art styles to them and nice music, and you can farm and you can gather resources and create a family and build relationships and stuff like that. And we see a lot of those games available on mobile devices as well. And also keeping in mind that mobile gaming is something that has been really kind of exploding over the past, I don't know, maybe 10-ish or so years, because we're coming from a time where, for you and I at least, we remember when cell phones were just starting to become a thing, and then the flip phone was like the thing, and then now the flip phone is almost non-existent. The smartphone is the thing that everybody has, no matter where you fall in societal status. So I think that's also attributable to what we've seen in the percentage of people playing on mobile phones then versus now. And again, that library of games available, I think it just tends to be a little more attractive, if you will, to female players. But as I said, those numbers are really starting to even out here.
Definitely. And I remember when cell phones were basically just a brick with an antenna that only businessmen had. But
The
as far
ones you
as
keep in the car, yeah.
but as far as mobile games go, I think Nintendo was probably a bit of a gateway, given its family-friendly content such as Mario Kart, and the fact that during these pandemic lockdowns, parents and children were thrust together for most of the day, and so children's gaming habits may have been an influence on parents.
Yep, that's a fair point too. During the pandemic, children might have been being schooled from home. They might have been on a hybrid schedule where the school was rotating which classes could be in the building and which ones had to be out. So they didn't have too many students in the building at the same time. And parents, well, they might have been out of work. They might have been displaced because of the pandemic. They might have been working from home because of the pandemic. They might have had to be home because of their children being home. So they were definitely thrust together a lot more than usual. And on the one hand, the parent is probably trying to keep the child occupied so that they're not losing their freaking mind having their kid around, pretty much 24/7 with them. So it's like, here, play your Switch, leave me alone. So there's that. But also there was probably a desire from the adults in the room as well to take advantage of the extra time they had, right, to bond with their children because they don't typically have as much time with them, and to potentially pick up some new hobbies of their own. Because for anyone who is really active and like to go out a lot, that wasn't really viable anymore. So they needed to kind of branch out and see what other things they could be interested in. So they sit down and watch their kid play like Stardew Valley or something. It's like, oh, well, that looks kind of nice. Hand me the controller. Let me try for a bit. So, yeah, there was definitely an opportunity there for that system to kind of grow grow extra branches, if you will, touch extra people. And I think the Nintendo was kind of like ripe for that kind of opportunity because it is such as you said, a family friendly console with so many family friendly games on it. That was the one that the children were most likely already had in their hands when the pandemic came about. And the PS5 actually wasn't out quite yet. So that certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, so that kind of makes sense.
And the pandemic lockdowns with respect to the rise of the cozy gaming genre also makes a lot of sense too, given that during hard times like the Great Depression, for example, or World War II, there is a growing interest in escapism. Think Laurel and Hardy, for example. Pack up your troubles for 30 minutes in a dark movie theater and
Hmm.
become engrossed in something that is comforting, that is pleasant, that brings humor as a kind of light in the proverbial darkness.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too. Because I think a lot of the people going through the pandemic, video games in general are escapism, but sometimes when things are getting especially rough out there, you don't want to escape into something that's also very stressful. So when you think of action-packed games like FPSs and stuff, that might not be the kind of escapism you're looking for when you're already super stressed. Depends on the gamer, of course. But I think a lot of people, when they're going through so much tension on, in real life, in this world, when they go into the gaming world, they're looking for something to kind of bring that back down, to kind of equalize them internally, if you will. And cozy gaming is a really good way of doing that because not only are you able to, kind of project yourself into the character that you're playing in the game, but that character also isn't going through all these really stressful things of, people or creatures hunting them down and trying to kill them. It's let's build this farm, let's build relationships with the townspeople. So I can definitely see how an event as stressful as the pandemic would make people want a different kind of escapism. Um, eh, I'd have to look into the stats, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't an increase in people playing stuff like The Sims as well. Another thing that I would personally consider a cozy game because it is such a low level stakes, if you will. Not that you can't kill your sim because you definitely can. I've done it. I've done it quite a few times.
Like a gigapet.
Well, sometimes they're not very good at cooking and they just set the house on fire. So there are some
Yeah,
stakes, some
that's
stakes to be
relatable.
had. But generally speaking, The Sims is, a low pressure, kind of slower, even keeled kind of game where it's just about the building of relationships and getting a job that you actually want your character to have. And there's a micromanagement element to it that can be very comforting for people because it's like you get to take control of the sim in their life when you don't feel like you're in control of your own life. So that's probably an element here too in terms of like what kind of escapism people were looking for during the height of the pandemic.
And also in the midst of something categorically abnormal, you have these games that are sort of an idyllic iteration of the normal.
No, that's a fair point too. So let's talk about why women have been so hesitant to join the gaming space and to identify themselves as gamers?
Well, 75% of females polled aged 18 to 24 experienced abuse online. 35% received violent messages, 25% experienced depression from abuse, and 11% felt suicidal, according to Sky News. According to other data, 80% of women who experienced abuse said the messages were sexual in nature. 35% said the messages were violent or threatening, according to Sky Broadband. Women are hesitant to use the voice chat feature for fear of being identified as female and being specifically targeted. Males are routinely receiving homophobic abuse, but females are treated like they don't even belong in gaming. And rape threats are incredibly common, according to the BBC Three. Women are targeted with distinct forms of harassment, such as sexually explicit hate speech and demands for personal information, unsolicited DMs and friend requests, trolling. The female presence is treated as a deliberate intrusion, a disruption, and a bid for male attention, according to Solari. Also, according to Solari, inclusivity and representation in games receives pushback against a perceived forced diversity.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm not surprised by those statistics. Being a female within the gaming space myself, I have been on the receiving end of some nasty behavior from males in the gaming space as well. I've never gotten anything so severe as like a rape or death threat, which is absolutely horrendous. But I have definitely gotten stuff like, what the heck are you doing in an FPS game? Like back when I used to play Call of Duty, or some heavy flirtation, some sexual innuendos. So yeah, I've definitely been privy to those kinds of things. And as a teenager, I would often game with groups of male friends specifically, not female friends, but male friends, because they kind of created this like cocoon around you where if somebody started harassing you, well, then they just kind of, bully them right out of it. So, especially when playing MMOs, I was not really online too much by myself. And when I wasn't talking to people too often, definitely not on voice chat. By text, sometimes there would be some talking back and forth, but voice chat, I kept very minimal and typically did not travel alone. And every once in a while, you'd meet a nice person on there. But especially for games that attract younger audiences, no offense to the younger male generation, but when they're still, maturing and figuring things out and trying to find themselves and everything, they can be even more disruptive in that space. And women during their teen years tend to be very unsure of themselves and have a lot of confidence issues and anxiety. So it's just like another thing on top of so many other things that women tend to deal with in just their day to day lives, and just the normal things of going to school, and the
Mhm.
harassment that you have to deal with there sometimes. Depressing statistics, but not surprising whatsoever. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Dr. K, or some of you may know him by his channel name, which is Healthy Gamer GG. He actually did an interview with some female gamers on this issue specifically.
Yeah, and a lot of them said that they were basically treated as an NPC. They received, unsurprisingly, a lot of unwanted attention, angry reactions from male players if they didn't give them the expected or desired response, requests for nudes, the proverbial nice guy routine, a la, emotional manipulation, and the use of pretense to engage women in conversation. But when female players actually talked, they were perceived as attention whores and were accused of flirting just because they were friendly. Females tolerate an exorbitant amount of abuse and moderate their own behavior to prevent further harassment. When they do express their feelings of being treated poorly, they're told they can't take a joke. They're told they don't belong. They should do what they're told. Romantic rejections are met with murder threats, and people are even stalked. This abuse is normalized, and female gamers endure a different kind of normal. And if they try to do anything about it, they're accused of overreacting. Their responses are essentially gate kept by male gamers. Only 5% of video games showcase female protagonists, and perhaps that is part of the problem since representation is very important and has real world impacts. Most female characters are objectified and hypersexualized and frequently portrayed as the love interest of a male character.
Yeah, for sure. I think representation in the gaming space is getting better over time. I do think it's moving in the right direction. But yeah, there's definitely still a trend, if you will, of the female characters in games just being very exaggerated. The breasts are exaggerated, the butt is exaggerated, all of the curves are exaggerated. The hair is always, full and flowy, and the face is always perfect. And it's just, it sets people up to have unrealistic expectations, essentially. And that's not to say that you can't have attractive characters in your games. Absolutely. And that's not to say that you can't have games that are super cartoony where everything is exaggerated. Yeah, absolutely. But when we hear stories like, gamers freaking out because I believe it was Tifa whose breasts
People
were like,
Lockhart, yeah.
yeah, it
Mhm.
was Tifa whose breasts were like reduced a bit in the remake of Final
Mhm.
Fantasy
Yep.
VII. And there was just like this outcry of like, how dare you make her boobs a little more realistic? And it's just so silly. It's like she's still a beautiful cartoon character. All they did was just make her body just slightly more realistic in the way that it looks. And there was also some outcry about the female protagonist of Horizon Zero Dawn, Aloy, because she doesn't look feminine enough. You made her ugly. What the heck? And it's like, I personally, I don't think she's actually ugly. Is she super attractive, over the top? No, she just looks normal. But like which obviously the stuff she wears and the way she does her hair isn't what we typically see. She's in a fantasy setting, or well,
Mhm.
fantasy sci-fi setting because it's future based. But she just kind of looks like a normal woman. There was some outcry about how you could see like peach fuzz like along
Still
the
true.
mustache line here and like around like different parts of her face because graphics have gotten really powerful, and the more powerful they get, the more you can enhance the realism of the characters that you're putting on the screen. So they decided to put some peach fuzz on different parts of her face, like to kind of show off, like, look how great this is, look how realistic these characters are. And then there was an outcry about, oh my God, she's got fuzz on her face. It's like, yeah, that's because that's what people actually have. Like, just because we're females doesn't mean we don't have any hair on our faces. It's just, it's very light. It's very soft. It's, you typically can't see it unless you get really freaking close and start, looking for it. So just some really kind of ridiculous dramatizations of issues that aren't actually issues. The fact that these whole things have came out to begin with, though, is a sign that things are moving in the right direction.
Mm.
Because if there wasn't a group of people making a fuss, then it means that change isn't occurring. Because there will always be people who are resentful of that change, even if the change is mostly positive.
It's always snowing somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a little bit of flack in the esports community as well for a bit because of the all female team from Russia.
Mhm.
Was it Russia?
Yeah, the first pro esports all female team was a Russian team called Vivictus, and
Hmm.
they became famous for a series of catastrophic defeats, according to Nikolai. And this is sort of branded female gamers. The first and only all female team in pro esports just happened to be a disaster.
Mm.
And that has become sort of definitive, even though, of course, we cannot judge an entire sex by the failure of one group of ill prepared esports players.
Right. And, it definitely not. And there's been, you know, plenty of catastrophic failures by all male teams.
Mhm.
But it's like, okay, there's so many all male teams out there that it doesn't seem like a drop in the bucket when one of those teams does horrible. But then you finally get an all female team out there in a very male dominated space, because esports especially is very male dominated. And well, they're just not the best players, that they obviously had to be good enough to get into an esports league, but they're not the best, and they went against people that were better at the game than them, and they lost, and like that's just the reality of it. Somebody's going to lose. But the fact that you take this one team and just decide that based on however many people were in the team, esports teams are, I think, are usually around five. It depends on the game, obviously, but let's just say five is like an average. If you take a team of like five women and then decide that the fate of those five women determines like basically the skill level of every other woman gamer out there, like that is just such a huge and preposterous assumption to make, to take a small group of people and just be like, well, you're all like this. And we see this in other areas of life as well, of course. This isn't something that just persists in sexism, it persists in other areas as well. Topic for another day. But yeah, it's kind of astounding to me sometimes
Well,
how
it's
you can take
stereotyping 101.
yes, it is. And I guess at this point in my life I should not be astounded by anything stereotypical, because that's just the world that we were born into, the world that we were raised in, the world that we still live in. But yeah, I guess this one hits a little bit harder than some of the other ones, being a woman in the gaming space, and not one that has ever been super interested in esports, but I definitely used to like watching other people in it and just thinking, man, how long is it going to take for women to be able to kind of climb out of that ditch and no longer be seen as the esports underdogs because one team just didn't have what it took to really rise the ranks.
Well, that's the thing about discrimination, where there is this sort of eagerness to identify failure and to embrace it with zeal as a kind of stamp on the entire marginalized group,
Mm.
and then to maintain it.
Yeah, for sure. Now let's talk a little bit about women within the gaming industry.
So the industry is projected to reach 286 billion USD by this year, according to figures by Statista, and 3.3 billion people are predicted to participate in gaming in 2024, according to Solari.
So obviously a huge industry, and becoming bigger and bigger by the year. And again, going back to what we were talking about earlier with the pandemic, I think the pandemic really did create like an extra boom within the industry. It was already getting a lot of attention. It was already something that was, transitioning from the only nerds do it to almost everyone does it. It was on that path, but I think the pandemic really set it up to go even further. So, with the gaming industry growing so exponentially, how is the industry shifting so that it can include women to actually support this kind of crazy growth it's going through?
A 2020 study of the top 14 global gaming companies showed that 84% of executive positions in the industry were still held by men. And a 2015 gender balanced workforce survey reported by The Guardian showed that 45% of women working in the UK gaming industry believed that their gender limited their career prospects, and 35% experienced bullying or harassment due to their gender. But the industry is interested in developing the cozy gaming genre, as you previously pointed out. And 28% of the industry is female now. And those numbers are expected to rise in female coders and game designers, as over a third of university STEM students are female. And more games are being released featuring LGBTQIA characters, and female-focused firms are working to expand the range of genres, including RPGs and MOBAs.
All right, so there's some good news there, and I think more good news on the horizon. Obviously, we've still been seeing a lack of female support within the gaming industry. 2015 showing some not so great statistics with women specifically in the gaming industry in the UK. 2020 showing that there's still a gap, especially at the executive level within the gaming industry. And that's not so surprising because we see a gap in other industries at the executive level as well. But, 28% of the industry being female, it means the numbers are moving in the right direction. That number definitely needs to come up.
Mhm.
There's definitely not enough representation, if you will, within the gaming industry for women, but it's headed in the right direction. And if we've got, as the stats are saying, we've got a third of STEM students being female, then that is a sign that the younger generations should start coming into the gaming industry, or at least something related there too, as they start to grow up. So, people like myself in the millennial group, we will probably be seeing more of them potentially shifting their careers towards something within the gaming industry, like I myself am trying to do. And then people from Gen Z who some of them are now in the workforce. They're either in college or they're actually in what is probably their first or second job at this point. So I think that's probably where we're going to see the most impact in getting women into the gaming industry is from the pool of Gen Zers that are, still new to the work world and may not have even entered it yet. I know that they've been kind of a a big piece of different efforts within just the workplace in general. You hear about things like lazy girl jobs and stuff, and this is all coming from the Gen Z group. And I think that they are going to be an important force when it comes to getting the gaming industry more equalized between men and women, because we're not trying to push men out. We're just trying to make space for women too. We want representation from all groups there, and we want them all working together because that is the best way for us, the consumers, to get the best products. This has been Geeky Kitten.
And Analytica.
Thank you for joining us on the Missing Links podcast. Please stay tuned for episode 2, where we're going to focus on male allyship in the gaming space.